Thank you very, very much for the opportunity to let me come and visit with so many old friends and see new friends to spend time with you. I'm Craig Webb, and like all good organizations, you can't get by unless you've got some sponsors helping make it all possible and buying the bagels and everything else. One of the sponsors has asked us to run this message.
I heard from Bernie Marcus, who started Home Depot, that if he had to try to replicate that company in this market now, he would never be able to accomplish it. It's just that at that time, it was the right time for that business model. And with Alaire, it's the right time.
We thank Alaire for sponsoring, and why don't you just stand up and identify yourself so that when people come to the table, they'll know who they're talking to.
I'm Chad Hackman with Alaire Homes Arlington. We used to be Arlington Construction Management back in the day.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So once again, it is a great pleasure for me to come by and spend time with you this morning. Those of you who know me may remember me from other worlds, but just to give some background, I was a reporter for something like 50 years. This is me interviewing Colonel Sanders in the summer of 1973. You can see the most modern technology that we have available. One of the things I went on to do, I worked at the Wall Street Journal, United Press International. I chased President Reagan through Venice. I covered the World Cup soccer tournament. And about 15 years ago, I got an opportunity to become editor-in-chief of Pro Sales magazine, which is the it barely exists now, but it was one of the biggest publications for people who run lumber yards. And for the final 5 of those years, I also was editor-in-chief of Remodeling magazine, which produced the cost versus value report and did a lot of other stuff. Taking Colonel Sanders' advice, 3 years ago, he started Kentucky Fried Chicken when he was 62. I started Web Analytics when I was 64, but it's never too late for anything. And my job is to talk about the trends and the threats and the opportunities affecting the supply chain. And that's what I spend my time doing: research, talking to people, being an interlocutor. Some people, I'm in effect the lumberyard whisperer to a lot of people. I explain lumberyards in many ways. And so I know that these are strenuous times that in which I'm talking to you now. Your customers are constantly ringing that bell, wanting to get your attention. They're coming at you and saying, when are you going to serve me? What are you going to do? When is that product going to arrive? And no matter how hard you try, no matter what little things you do for them, they just keep looking at you and asking you for service. And they ring that bell again and again and again. And if you don't do it, they're going to ring somebody else's bell. That is the challenge that we're all facing right now. Of course, it's not cats ringing bells. It's the supply chain hell that we're all dealing with.
Thanks that video. No one will remember.
That's right.
We're back here.
That's right.
Amazing.
You probably have seen stories about how many ships are just docked right now at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. 60, 70, 3 or 4 times as much. By the way, you can multiply that by 4 or 5 times, and that's how many boats are in Hong Kong and the like trying to come over. Lots and lots of stories that we can all tell about what's going wrong right now. But just to give you one sense of one little story, I heard from an executive at Marvin Windows who said that, if you want to do a double hung window, it really takes about 130 different parts to do a decent double hung window. And one of them are these tiny, tiny little pieces of plastic that go between the double panes or the triple panes. They're spacers. And Cardinal Glass, which is one of the main producers of window materials in the United States, used by a lot of the manufacturers, has such a shortage of just those tiny little plastic spacers that they are having to fly them over every single day to the United States in order to serve barely the needs of people. And that is sort of a representative of what's going on. That old line from Poor Richard's Almanac, for want of a nail, is we've got that problem. And the one thing I would stress to you is that this is not a knot that if you just pull one thread, everything is going to go into place. The supply chain is screwed up from beginning to end. From the factory. Vietnam, I was told that you have to remember that the rest of the world has not been vaccinated as much as we have. They tend to have much stiffer rules about shutting down. In Vietnam, for example, if you work at the factory and there are COVID cases, you can't go home. And if you go home, you got to stay there for 10 days. So, the factories in Vietnam are being shut down, the places in China are shut down. Then you get to the ports. It used to, a container that used to cost you $2,000 now costs you $30,000 if you can find one at all. Many of you have seen these stories, and I'm sure that all of you have been going through your own personal hell. And my job is to say, when are we going to get out of hell? The best answer I can give you right now is not until late summer of next year, at the earliest, for most products that you sell, or that you use in your services. And just to give you an example of the challenges that I'm seeing in the construction supply community, there is a major distributor of hard lines. Hard lines are those screws and nuts and bolts and things that you sell inside the store. And Orgill is one of the major distributors of those products in the United States. They tend to measure their success in what's called the fill rate. What percentage of things that they said they were going to deliver to the store actually are in the box? And in general, in 2019, about 97% of what they said they were going to get you arrives. It's gotten as low as 75% lately. So, Elizabeth, I suspect that your life, you probably are feeling a lot more in common these days with Forrest Gump, because, that box of chocolates, you never know what's going to be inside. And they're working like crazy. This is a huge operation, and they think that maybe by December they'll get to 87%, which means 13 out of every 100 things that they said they were going to have, they're not going to have in the box. And this is an indication of just how long it's going to take. There's an organization called the Farnsworth Group, which does research and interviews remodelers and small builders around the country, also tradesmen. They just did a survey last month, and they reported it 3 days ago. And let's see, 28, 33, 61, 68 to 70% of all people in your businesses are having material shortages. So your pain is being shared. Your experiences might be slightly different. When they were talking about the availability issues, lumber, then plumbing. One thing that's not on here is appliances. And Leo, you said that you 8 months to get a stove. Was that what you just said? So, and I'm sure all of you are smarter. Collectively, we're a very smart group of people, and you're going to tell me stories that I'm unfamiliar with. But I'm sure that for all of you, you've got your own little pain point going on right now. One of the things that I hope you will be keeping in mind when you're doing your budgets has to do with what they refer to in the production building environment as back charges. And here's an example. Let's say you're building a house or you're doing an addition, and you've got a certain cycle that you go through. We do this first, we then put in these boards, and then we nail up this, and then we put in the windows, we close up the house, and then we can work on other things. But what if the windows aren't there? Well, you still got to protect the house. So in their case, they're going to have to go in and bring in plywood, close up the windows, close up the window spaces, and then just wait for the windows to arrive. Well, what happens while you're waiting for the windows, to arrive? it screws up all your timing. But also, the time comes when finally the windows do show up. You got to go up. You got to rip down the plywood. You probably got to repair the problems that are caused by nailing up that plywood to begin with. You finally put in the windows, and maybe you've had to make some other adjustments. It slowed your ability to do other things like put up molding. All of those were not part of your original budget because you weren't expecting that you were going to have that delay in the windows arriving. So you have extra costs. And in the production environment world, they call that back charges because there are extra charges that are going into the production cycle that had not happened before. And so as you're planning, I guess one of the questions is that as you do your budgets, are you budgeting for these extra things that you have to do? Now, Victoria, I'm probably not explaining myself very well, but is there a phrase I should be using that? Okay, it's just, I guess you've got to have a little bit extra in your accounts to make sure that we get that right. Even if China sorts itself out, even if the ships sort themselves out, we have a dramatic shortage of warehouses in the United States. In fact, Riverside County, which is right outside of LA, is sort of the warehouse central of the United States. Right now, they are so full up that people are shipping stuff to Arizona, people are shipping stuff to Salt Lake City, or trying to get it as fast as they can on the railroad cars to Chicago, because they don't have any room at the warehouses in Southern California. Of course, what that also means is the railroads are all screwed up in Chicago. And of course, the trucks getting them there are having their own issues between hurricane and fire season. I was just reading a report yesterday that there are 65 major forest fires going on right now in the United States. Only one has been controlled. Then we all know about the trucking issues and the shortages of truckers. I'm talking, or I've heard stories about whether we can change the rules so that 18-year-olds can drive big rigs. Yeah. And self-driving trucks just aren't coming as fast as we can. And one reason why I say this is going to last quite a while has to do with the idea of how much stuff you need, what your normal inventory would be. This is according to the Census Bureau, for all lumber and construction material companies, the idea is that over the last 10 years, you've had about 1.5 widgets for every one widget that you sold. So your ratio of supplies to sales is about 1.5 to 1. You always have a little bit extra. We've been way below that all the way to the end here. We're not near 1.49. And so it's going to take a while to just even get the inventories back. I mean, Elizabeth, if you think about your shelves, are they a little more bare than they used to be?
There's certain things you can't get.
What, can you give an example?
There's some hangers, some metal hangers you can't get. And of course, lead times and stuff on windows and things like that.
Yeah, you're a Marvin dealer, so.
Yeah, insulation. We went for a long time, we couldn't get any rock wool. So we finally got a little bit in, but it's a problem. It's a problem because you want to sell it, people need it.
Yeah. I was just talking to a guy, a gypsum distributor, and I said, "How are we doing on drywall?" He said, "Oh, we're not doing too badly at all on drywall. We can meet people. Of course, we don't have any mud." So.
We can't get any tubs, the vegetable tubs, resin tubs.
Really? Well, it's the resin shortage, and that was the freeze up in Texas. Got the resin plants knocked out. Lots of people are worried about Christmas. I'm sure that you guys are, I would suspect right now that you can't make any promises that you'll have work done by Thanksgiving or even Christmas. So, so just even planning for next year. And of course, that's a cash flow issue. That's how much money can you last, between here and there issue. One of the best people in the country to talk about where things are is Gene Sirocco, is the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles. So he's right in the middle of that storm. And, he said, it's going to take another year just to get inventories up to where we are. So once again, as painful as it is for me to say this, this hell is going to last for another 6 to 9 months at least. And so managing your budget accordingly is important. And I think one of the things that's going to be a challenge for you is the fact that in order to get stuff, you got to buy it and you're going to have to store it. And I would wonder, how many of you are going to have to clean out the family garage in order to make extra room for stuff? Or, do you have storage facilities right now that maybe ought to be reorganized because you're going to have more? Because you just can't count on when the stuff is going to come. And I think this would be particularly true for people, let's say, who are doing decking, where you're going to be using the same fasteners again and again, or you're going to be using composite lumber. Certainly, specialty items or custom orders, windows, doors, you can't do that. But are there other things where, can you buy more mud, when it becomes available? Is there a place to store drywall? I think that the notion of what they refer to as just-in-time manufacturing basically is not going to happen in the near future like it has in the past. Interestingly enough, though, for all I've just been talking about the supply chain, the biggest problem that pros said they were having was COVID. And it has to do with a couple of different things. But all I can say, what I'd like to say about COVID is this. We've had a pandemic, and now we are turning into something that is endemic. Endemic means it's here, it's with us, it doesn't go away. It's like, the best example of that is like the flu. It comes every year, you got to learn to live with it. Theoretically, there are ways to fight it back, like getting a flu shot every year. But then again, only about 49% of Americans get flu shots. I think that for managing your businesses, some of the things you need to be thinking about is that your people will be getting sicker more often because it's not just the flu they're going to be getting. There will be cases of COVID and other things that will come around. Long COVID, people suffering long-term impact is going to happen. I think your insurance rates are going to go up. I think ultimately, America, whether we want it, no matter what we feel about COVID, I think that the general attitude about COVID is that it's going to be sort of like alcohol. There are a lot of people who don't like alcohol and don't like drunks and don't like drunk drivers and don't like people getting blotto and all sorts of other stuff. But we tried to ban it 100 years ago, and prohibition didn't work. We're going to have a society which understands that COVID is going to be with us now and forever, like cats, And so how do you run your business accordingly? It's just going to become part of your business life and your business expenses. And, that's going to have work stoppages and the like. About 44% of the people who took the Farnsworth Group survey said that they've stopped for one reason or another. About half of that, so 22%, said it was because their workers were concerned about COVID. Homeowners also were concerned, and then material availabilities were what were stopping people otherwise. So all I can recommend is, vaccinations and diligence to keep an idea. Now, material prices was one of the things that was brought up, and I know it's been a concern for a bunch of you. I would bring up things in a couple of ways. One is that maybe it's because I was a history major in college, but in some ways, what we've been going through with regard to the COVID pandemic, it reminds me a little bit of what life was like right at the end of World War II, where we had dramatic shortages and people were all busting out to try to go out and spend money, and we didn't have enough products, and we had inflation in 1947 and 1948. The economy didn't run as well or as efficiently then as it did now, so we ended up with a recession in 49. But you can see, 14% increase in prices. That's double, 2.5 times what we've been going through lately and been concerned with. And to give you a sense of just how long this demand lasted, many of you remember Levittown, 1947. My grandparents actually were one of the original buyers in Bel Air and Bowie, which was another Levitt place. I didn't realize my grandparents were part of a revolution at the time. But anyway, sales began in 1947, so we're 2 years after the end of the war. 1,400 homes in Levittown were purchased in the first 3 hours. Now, that's an example of incredible latent demand. Will we see that happening now? Not quite, but it does cause prices to rise. And the prices have people have been talking in general about how construction materials, at least they're starting to level off now, but it was largely because of lumber. And I think all of you know that other things are costing a lot more. Plastic materials, metals, gypsum, those are still going up. So I would say that one of the things also when you're talking to your customers, unfortunately, they look at the futures prices for lumber and think everything's better. And then, so having to explain, no, there's this, no, there's that. Some lumber yards, I'm not sure if Tart does it, but I've seen some other places do reports basically just saying, here's what we're short on. Here's how long it's going to take to get this or that. Romac Lumber in Florida, for example, does an index saying, the average house, it used to cost this, but if you take all the materials, it'll cost that. McCoy's down in Texas does a report. It might be helpful to talk to your local building material dealer and say, can you just give me a quick rundown of where things are, and have them write the email, send it to you so that you can hand it to your customer and say, look, I'm not trying to short you. This is what my supplier is telling me. And I think that that's probably one way that you can at least take care of that. I'll stop here for just 1 second. Mason, you said that because of all the price increases, you're going a little more toward time and materials?
We're having an escalation clause in our fixed price
Okay.
contract.
Has anybody else sort of changed their contracts or their deals? What are you doing?
Same thing, have a clause in there that we can adjust the fixed fee for certain materials.
Okay, and does it have a trigger on it or something like that, or
We have to show a quote or some kind of estimate.
right? And you said you're doing something?
Yeah, we're just doing a COVID cost escalation.
Oh, it is actually called COVID cost?
Yeah.
That's a CC of a different kind on a message, yeah. No, I think that, and how are the customers taking that?
They want some validation. It depends on the client. Some have been like, we get it, and they write the check, and we've had a couple we've had to, go get certified proof from Congress. But
Yeah.
for the most part, we've been able to.
Victoria, are you hearing about other people, doing anything that you think's a stealable idea?
Well, the other one besides escalation clause is just treating lumber as an allowance. And building up contingency, but pull some of those products out, just if you suspect they're gonna go up, treat it as an allowance and build it in that way.
Yeah, I would think the one challenge is that how many allowances could, how many lines could you have in your allowance?
Yeah.
You were talking about windows, but you were also talking about some other shortages, Leo. I'm trying to think about how many different lines you'd have to have on that.
Well, what we've done is, as soon as the person signs the contract, within this next week, I'll buy everything. I'll buy everything, make all my purchases, so I lock my costs in, so I
Right.
don't have to deal with the escalation clauses and anything like that. I'm fortunate in that I've built a warehouse, actually, this past year, that I thought I was be putting cabinets in it, but now I've got all my plumbing fixtures, hardware. I had to do a mass buy on all the Schluter products because they're not available now, so I bought enough Schluter to last me 6 months. Plus all the all set because that wasn't available either. So I filled it up with everything else.
I think that's a good idea. Yes, ma'am.
For us in the stone industry, we've been taking deposits early. If they are interested in that particular material or a contractor wants that particular material, we're fortunate we have enough warehouse space. We will buy up front, hold it until the project's ready.
And we've been talking about the ships coming from Europe. What's it like coming from Europe and India and places like that?
Well, the shipping costs are triple right now. And the stone industry is feeling it now. We're kind of the late ones with the supply chain issues. And we're seeing it in the quality of stone from our distributors too. We have to do much more quality control. You know, I don't know if they were in the back room or what the deal was, but, and it's at least 2 to 3 months on the scene.
It sounds like the moral of the story also is to make sure that you as a buyer have a good partner who's looking out for you, and dance with who brung you, you know, that sort of thing. The one long-term inflation thing I would bring up, and this was pointed out by a couple of economists that I have been hearing lately. This chart is from the National Association of Home Builders, but it basically goes like this. If you talk about housing affordability in the United States, because of relatively low interest rates and up until 2019, there was a lot of competitive pricing going on. When economists were asking themselves, when are houses for a huge percentage of Americans going to become affordable? At what interest rate for your mortgage do you have to get to before it really starts to be a problem? And the answer through about 2019, early 2020 was, well, we don't really have to worry until rates get to about 5%. Well, because housing prices have been increasing so much lately, the economists are going back and looking again and saying, okay, if you're buying these more and more expensive houses, at what point does the interest rate really get to be a problem? And the new answer is 4%. Now, most people know that mortgage rates right now are around 3%, and the Federal Reserve has been trying, has been buying mortgage bonds and doing everything else, holding things up. But the net effect of all that is that we've been keeping it low. But the tapering is going to start. There is a general expectation that over the next 2 years, rates will rise, and mortgages probably in the next 2 years will hit 4%. That is going to have implications for you, because the less that a new home becomes affordable, the more likely it is people are going to want to buy existing homes, age in place, stay where they are. And so what this really indicates for me is that this is a demand driver for you. Now, 100 years, is Washington safe for the next 100 years? Well, as long as the government stays in Washington, I think it's okay. But I think that at least in our lifetimes, demand is going to be good. And that brings us to the issue of, really what to expect and what people are wanting. The American Institute of Architects does a home trends design survey. Just in the last week or so, they came out with their latest results. There is increased interest, as you would expect, in multi-generational housing and the aging in place things you hear: bedroom on the first floor, wider hallways, laundry facilities, ramps, elevators, all those kinds of things. When in doubt, as a remodeler, go to the old people. Screw the millennials, screw the Gen Xers. The baby boomers are the ones with the money and the lack of interest in doing the work themselves. And eventually we will leave this earth and give our money to other people, But in the meantime, the most powerful force in the world, even more powerful than gravity, is grandchildren. And people want to be near their relatives, and they want to. The notion of staying where you are is probably more powerful than it's ever been. What other trends are we seeing? Well, certainly outdoor living. There's even more increase, and the bottom line from this is that there had been a concern among a number of economists that when 2020 came and we had this big, huge run-up in remodeling expenditures, that it was going to suck all the projects from 2021 into 2020, and that there would be a drop-off. That was the general feeling. Well, what they found is that it didn't happen. Remodeling demand is as robust now as it was last year, and is likely to stay that way for a while, in part because people are reconfiguring their homes, they're working from home, they're doing more things. Outdoor living always made sense to me because you can get, extra square footage at only 10 or 15% of the price of building an addition. So I could see why people are doing more decks. But the home office makes sense. More walls. I'd be interested in hearing from you guys later on whether you're actually being requested to break up open spaces and put in an extra, build an extra room. Are you seeing that?
Or closing off rooms.
Closing off rooms so that people can have their their office or their yoga mat.
Put more doors in on the home offices
Yeah.
lately,
So
so they can keep the dogs and the kids out.
yeah, and I think that maybe even some soundproofing too, double insulation. But yeah, I can see all that, and consequently, I should go back and talk to the door people and say whether, if in the old days you thought that the typical 3,000 square foot house had X number of doors, maybe it's X number of doors plus now because of that, which probably means more demand on the door industry. And as far as your own, the do-it-yourself crowd, the people doing their own work, like I said, the demand does matter. The black chart, the black bars represent do-it-yourselfers. The gray bars represent do-it-for-me. And so if you're saying, is it a somewhat good time or a really good time, the do-it-for-me, the people who would hire you, 58% are saying right now is a good time to do a remodel. Some of them it's because they've had, they're not quite spending as much because they haven't traveled as much, or they've found the need to do other things. Another indication that you can count on continued strong business for quite a while. Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies every quarter puts out what they refer to as LIRA, the leading indicator of remodeling activity. And so these numbers that you look at indicate how much spending is going on remodeling and general home improvements by renters, by landlords, over 4 quarters. And you can see that things were looking pretty good right now. We're in the 3rd quarter, which is the P here, 8.5% growth. Maybe it'll drop a little bit, but compared that 8.5 with where we were a few years back. So, if you've been busier, it's because people have money and they want your business. And of course, the great thing we've also got going for us is that houses keep getting older, especially in the DC area. We're getting to the average age of a house. We're getting to houses that were built in the 1970s, which was actually the most active period we ever had in home construction. We had like 2.2 million housing starts a year. And as some people have told me, we built a lot of really lousy houses in the 1970s. Certainly compared with what we demand out of a house today. So, that's good. I do believe that code changes and other things will be a factor. And this is definitely a case for those of you who maybe are being asked to build beach houses or houses near flood zones and the like. FEMA rates are going up all the time. I was talking to a guy who is in Florida, and he said it used to be all the Miami-Dade codes were really just on the coast, and then the last hurricane went through the center of the state. Now they're going to have stronger windows, and I think that that's going to be happening everywhere. So as we go through all this, I think the question I think deserves to be asked is, how do you run a business in a time like this? Victoria, I learned a great deal from you one day when you said that the best R&D is rip-off and duplication. So you may see a few slides here that remind you of some things that you've done. First, I want to congratulate you folks for being in the room. According to Harvard, in general, every year, about 1 out of every 8 remodeling companies that had payroll has lost that status by the next year. So either they've gone out of business or they become sole proprietors. And if you take the number of remodelers that are in the industry in any given year, 1 out of 8 of them are brand new to that status. So in other words, the remodeling industry is a continuing new group of kindergartners, most of whom do not know how to do pricing, and then they undercharge compared to y'all. So for you to be able to survive and get to this point really matters. Interesting, even among home builders, 1 out of every 9. So it is a challenge. I would say that, by the way, if you get up, the odds of failure if you have less than $100,000 of income in your remodeler is about 1 out of 4. You get up to $1 million, it's about 1 out of 50. Which means still 2 out of every 100 go out of business even when you get up to $1 million in revenue. But if you can work your way up, you're a success. And figuring out how to get there and how to make sure you and your employees understand that makes sense. To that, I always hearken back to my days when I was working at the American Hospital Association. There was a very, very famous nun who was president of the association back in the 1960s or 70s. Sister Irene Krauss led the Daughters of Charity healthcare system, which was one of the biggest systems in the Midwest. And here's a woman who had taken vows of chastity and poverty and obedience, and when she talked to her staff, she had one message: no margin, no mission. And so, you know, I think that being a remodeler is an incredibly hard job because you actually have to be three things at once. First, you have to be really good as a remodeler. You have to have remodeling skills. You have to know how to do stuff. Second, you have to be really good with people because your relations with your customers are so intense, much more than, let's say, a guy working for the Levitts used to back when he didn't care who was going to be in the house. And third, you have to be good with money. And because of that triple threat, that triple challenge, I think that's one reason why remodelers have so many difficulties. Judith Miller, who many of you know from Remodeler's Advantage, talks about 5 stages of growth in terms of how you go from doing it all to finally hiring your first employee, or doing 2 houses at the same time, which of course makes your work 4 times as complicated, getting to perhaps a level where you're happy just being that. But then if you want to grow further, you get more complex, and then you finally get to the end where you're just on cruise control, and people are doing the work for you, and you're just making sure the leadership is what it is. 3 out of 5 levels can put you out of business. And so that's, I think, one of the challenges. If you can get to either 3 or 5, you're a winner. But the other 3 are pretty tough. So, learning those budgeting skills, like, the odds of a sale, I think really matter. I should point out that this has really come through to me so much more strongly since I created Webb Analytics. Webb Analytics 3 years ago was the first time in my life that I did not have a regular paycheck. And I know now more than I ever knew before what it means to have a business where you're not sure that that the pay's coming through. I think all journalists, by the way, pro remodel are those people. They ought to go for a year without a paycheck and then see how they report then. It's certainly, at the very least, knowing your cash flow and knowing how much money you have, or how much money you have on hand until the money runs out, how many days outstanding, certainly does matter. And to this, I would put in, what is the cost of that warehouse? What is the cost of that extra? How does your equipment budget rise when you do all of those kinds of things? And that's why the Victoria's around to help take care of the education needed for that stuff. Now, to that end, there is software and other things that can make your life easier. There's an Australian company that's been reaching out to me that has project management software that's cheaper than Co-Construct and pretty useful. It's called Build Exact. There are other companies that you don't have to go to Home Depot to get 60-day financing. There are companies that are coming in that are trying to work out things where they basically will worry about a lot of the credits and collections, as well as giving you extra credit, when you need it. The outsourcing also, of opportunities, is constantly growing because of the technology that we have. There's a remodeler in Orange County, California, I know, that has an employee in Florida. Answers the early phone calls, does the other stuff. This kitchen design company that's been reaching out to me is based in Central America, and they're doing hundreds of thousands of kitchen designs for about 15 or 16 different manufacturers. In fact, IKEA and other people. This company, iWorker, is actually offering to get you a virtual assistant who's in Zimbabwe, South Africa, Venezuela, for $6 an hour. You know, it's a weird and wonderful world. I think in general processes matter more than ever. Figuring out how to answer those things, and as you guys figure out how to grow, figuring out what you can automate so that you have more time to do the other things makes sense. You know, so if you look at, for example, the Reborn Cabinets, which is a company out in California, they've been spending huge amounts of time to try to automate as much as possible the interview period, to vet customers. There's a remodeler in New Jersey that I gave a prize to who has purposely set up his website in such a way to attract certain kinds of customers but repel other kinds of customers. And one of them is, he's in an area in New Jersey which has all these Wall Street types. He doesn't want those Wall Street types because they tend to be, bastards when it comes to, what they want and how they treat you and, how they expect you to serve them, like servants. And he doesn't want that business. So he just sort of writes it down and says, I'm a middle market guy. I'm not the top end of the market. There will people who will serve Mrs. Blimpington, and take care of that, but that's not me. But thinking about all those ways through the language you use, the processes you have, to just make things more efficient. So this is probably the most downer speech you've probably ever heard from any particular person, because I've basically said that your problems, life is going to be a drag for a while, but it's not like you're being stopped. It's just been harder than you expect. I had one guy who said of last year, I never made more money than I made last year, and I never enjoyed it less. And I think that if we can figure out how to keep the money flowing, but also try to reduce some of these other issues, it helps. I think that you guys have a great future ahead because you're in an area that is going to grow. You have a service that people want. You have knowledge that other people don't have. And I think you have a love for what you do that really makes life special. All of my slides will be available to you once the people at Pro give me your email addresses. If you want a more fancy version, like a PowerPoint or a great big one. Okay, I will send you the cat video, and go from there. And I'll be glad to send that stuff to you as well. But I hope this provided a little bit of information. I thank you very, very much. We have about 5 more minutes. Yes, sir.
I've heard from economists and stuff that we're going to have the roaring 20s, so to speak, as we did 100 years ago, but the 30s are also potentially similar.
Well, in general, yeah, roaring in these cases means maybe going from a 2.5% growth GDP growth to 5% GDP growth. So it's not quite like that crazy, but things are strong. The government pumped so much money into the economy that people's savings rates went up. They're not traveling as much as they used to. They're using technology to do things more efficiently. That just means more money for the things they care about. And so I think these are boom times in a sense for fixed assets like a home. Yes, and it already has been. I don't think, people talk about lumber prices going down, but you have to remember they went up 250, 300. Well, they went up. They were triple what they were before. I think they were like 300, and then they went up to over 1,000. And so the question was, how long does it take before people start protesting about prices? And the answer for lumber was it had to go up 200%. So yeah, we're going to be in a more inflationary environment, and that's just going to be part of our life too. But it used to be that 3% was considered normal. How many of you remember 13, 14, 15% mortgages? What was your first mortgage? 20. I have never heard any.
17%.
17%. I think mine was 15. You know.
Yeah,
I was
15 to
getting
17.
CDs, I was getting 14% for a CD,
Yeah.
but I was getting ripped off because the interest rates were like 22%.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the idea of having a CD that paid 14% too was just, you know. Now we're not going to go back to that. We've learned our lesson. There are enough people who have been around who remember those days to say we never want to go back to those days. But will prices go up 3, 4, 5% a year? Yeah. You had something. You had something.
Hey, great presentation. Something you started to get into, and I wanted to articulate further, which is how you capture increased costs, increased risk in your business model for each job. You're writing a detailed estimate. It is a business plan for your project, that customer. And obviously, if lumber goes up and window costs go up and temperature goes up, and you put those costs in there, even labor, you're going to mark those up and you'll capture that inflation. But the other thing you touched on was delays, having to go back, taking longer.
Back charges, yeah.
Back charges. Those costs, which tend to be an overhead,
Right.
is are you capturing the inflation and anticipated inflation? When raises are coming, and we all know we're going to have to pay more for our people to keep them, that you want to start building that into your construction model now so that January, February, March, you're actually able to make as much money as you should off of those higher labor prices that are usually overhead, not line item costing that you will then mark up.
How do you even put that in your spreadsheet? What do you call it? Like, you know.
It's called add a few points to the
P&S.
overall markup.
Unproductive labor.
Contingency fee. And
I would agree that if you add a factor in there, like this job's going to take 20 weeks, that's a price. If we say it's going to take 22 weeks, the price goes up. So that's captured, and then we mark that up.
Yeah.
But if you have your overhead costs that are going up, those overhead costs you have to actually raise up your markup. And I haven't heard that discussed.
Yeah, I did have a guy actually call me right to me recently, and he said, you know, my volume is going up great, my revenue is going up wonderfully, but my gross margin is going down. And somebody said, well, you know, does that mean that if the lumber price went up $4, did you only raise the price by $4, or did you raise it by $4 plus your gross margin? And you know, sometimes a lot of people forget that. I think you are right about that. Once again, you know, of all the years I've been going to these things and listening to other people, the answer to all issues that I tend to hear from experts is raise your prices. And I think, you know, for the most part, having contingencies and things like that to go to the customer is maybe the best way to protect yourself, to show that you're still trying to be honest and competitive, but at the same time protecting yourself. But I think you are right. You know, as inflation grows, there used to be that phrase, time value of money. You know, and I think that's going to be a factor too, you know, because CDs and other things are going to happen. We're at the end. Thank you so much.